Hey, good morning. Good morning. Glad to have you all here at the Texas Woodworking Festival. Now, this is our panel on finding your design voice. My name's Kyle Barton. I'm with the MWA podcast, and joining us today are two outstanding furniture makers, Matt Kenney and Mark Macek. And they're here to share their extensive experience and insights on furniture design. So, welcome to the panel, guys. We'll start with you, Matt, since you're holding the microphone. First question, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into woodworking.
So I'm Matt Kenney. I grew up, my dad was a contractor in Florida. So I grew up doing boardwalks around the house as a teenager, making like half pipes and street ramps. And then when I was in grad school, I just went and bought some boards and a couple of crude tools and made something.
Cool.
And just kind of got hooked on it and was fortunate to meet a professional furniture maker who's the father of one of my students. And over like 2.5 years, he taught me the fundamentals of making furniture. And I just went from there.
All right. Fantastic. So what about yourself, Mark?
My background was not in woodworking. I didn't grow up doing handy stuff at all. When I was in architecture school, I decided I needed some furniture, and I started building stuff even though I didn't really know how. There was a wood shop, and I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed drawing buildings. And so when I finished my degree, I learned woodworking properly at Austin Community College. And then I apprenticed with Louis Fry, who's a master craftsman now living in Dripping Springs, Texas. And that's where I really learned how to do it. It was from Louis.
Interesting. So you were in architecture back in the days where they called it architorture, right?
Architorture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the 1980s. And
so you were like up 4 days straight, those kind of days?
It is the hardest working field in higher education.
Yep.
Yeah, no, architecture students spend a lot of time in their studios making models, drawings. It's basically craft school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, cool. So we'll stay with you, Mark. What are 3 design inspirations that you have?
Actually, yeah, inspiration comes from a lot of different places. I would say, honestly, looking at antique furniture is probably the biggest inspiration I have, is going to stores that sell antiques, looking at them, picking them up. People think it's kind of weird when you pick up their chairs and look at them, but I get a lot of inspiration by seeing 20th century furniture design, and I also, having some design background, I have opinions about buildings and furniture and stuff, but also I have books. When I find somebody interesting that I like their work, if I'm really into it, I'll see if there's a monograph or a book about them. Half-price books and bookstores are a great place to find inspiration, I think.
No, fantastic. So Matt, same question to you. What are 3 design inspirations that you have?
Well, in high school, I took 3 years of drafting, and I kind of like look at the world that way. I took in the 80s,
Yep.
So it was all like pencil and paper and ink. So I think a lot of stuff I look at 2-dimensionally initially. So I get a lot of inspiration from architecture, actually, like looking at elevations. But in that regard, like probably the most important for me, I live in New England. There's lots of Shaker villages.
Right.
So I am a lot of inspiration from Shaker, just like the overall Shaker aesthetic and design, use of color and emphasis on proportions and things like that. But also, I like to look at sort of mid-century graphic design because I like the colors that were used.
Right.
And there's also a lot of geometric shapes in there, and so I like that as well. A lot of my work is I use a lot of color, like milk paint, and I try to rely on like geometric shapes in my work, like emphasize the shapes. But I'm also influenced by like Japanese architecture and ceramics and textiles because there's a nice sort of calm feeling in all of that, and I try to make things that make me feel like calm, and I like harmony.
Right.
So there's a lot of that in like all of Japanese design, I think, and so that I find a lot of inspiration there as well.
Yeah. Well, Mark, let's stick on that theme. So what are some inspirations you get from like outside of woodworking?
I do want to address outside influences, but when I was thinking of books, I was just realizing that when I finally got a copy of George Nakashima's The Soul of the Tree, it kind of changed my life. You know, when I got my Sam Maloof Woodworker book, it's like, look at what they're doing. So I think there's really is a lot of inspiration that you can get out of a book, for instance. So non-woodworking inspirations, honestly, rock and roll, man. It's an old saying. It's kind of like, does it rock? Like, is it interesting? Is it fun? You know, that's one of the questions I'm actually asking myself sometimes.
Nice.
Is this, I've drawn this thing, but is it fun? Does this, does it rock? It's a weird thing to ask, but, I think of like Sly and the Family Stone, and I'm like, am I making people feel like this?
Right.
Is that possible? I hope it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. One of the things I try to achieve when I design something is I want to make people feel something with what I've made. And I think it's sort of like that. You want to do something that has a bit of life in it. And so you do get inspiration from things that are far outside of woodworking, and it could be music or it could be a novel or something like that, because those all make you feel things. And I try to get that into my work,
Okay.
what I feel as I'm making it.
Okay. Well, we'll stay with you, Matt. So what does, once you have these inspirations and you start to get an idea, what do you do with those ideas? Do you prototype them, or, how does your process work as far as, from, say, inspiration to actually getting the design either in a prototype or on paper or whatnot?
Yeah, so one of the best things I was ever told about design was this guy named Hank Gilpin. I was working with him when I was at Fine Woodworking, and I asked him about that because he just had all these sketchbooks, and I was like, man, how do you do that? And he said, well, for him, design starts with constraint. So what I tend to think about is like, what am I making? What's its purpose? And also what's its function? And I think about like how big it is. And sometimes I also think about how much it's gonna cost. So I try to find things like larger things that are the constraints for me. And so once I have those, then I find it easier to design. And the first thing that I always do is sketch. So I have sketchbooks, and there's like this iterative process that is taught in design school, which I did not go to, but and I draw something really simple, knowing that I'm never gonna make that, but then just start making one or two changes at a time and redrawing until I have, like sometimes as many as 100 different little drawings, and I go back and like look through those and try to find what I really want in the piece, and refine that and refine it and refine it.
Now, are you using strictly pencil and paper, or have you gone into some of the, drawing programs they have on?
I do a
iPad
combination of things.
Yeah.
I do prefer pen and paper, but I also use Adobe Illustrator because I think in like 2 dimensions, which is weird, but I like to see elevations.
Right.
So I'll use that and to when I want to really start dialing in proportions. I'll do that, and so it's a combination of the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
but
Mark,
mostly pen and paper.
Yeah. So Mark, what about yourself? Once you have that inspiration, how do you get that into a prototype or onto a paper or whatnot?
Yeah, no, I agree with Matt that, well, okay, so we didn't call them, you call them limit constraints? Okay, in architecture school, you're given an assignment is like, okay, so here's a plot of land with this weird shape, and here's the building, and it's got to have these functions. And it's really an impossible assignment. Like, there's no way you can possibly do this perfectly. And those are like obstacles. But they're real, and you have to deal with them. In the case of woodworking, one of the obstacles is the nature of the material itself. Wood is really, really strong in 2 dimensions, and it's really weak going across the grain. And that's how sort of a slab works, you know. So even just looking at a piece of a slab can be an inspiration. But okay, so when you add a function to this, then like a dining table or a desk, those functionalities are then more obstacles. But what I'm really looking for is a visual idea that can solve all of those different inputs and make it look like something that's very simple. And so it takes, as you were saying, it takes iterations. You have to draw it multiple times, right? I might have 2 or 3 ideas, and I realize that one of them is no good, and then I need a couple of. You keep drawing. And sometimes that visual idea is something that comes about just through that process. Sometimes it's something you picture in your head. It's always easier if you can get a mental picture of your design ahead of time. But sometimes that design just has to be fleshed out by doing those iterations, changing this one thing a little bit, leading you down a path that helps you define what that visual picture is. Mm-hmm. As far as methods, I still prefer paper and pencil, right? Because that's how I was raised. Yeah. And I can do perspectives that are accurate enough to get an idea across. If it's something I've done before, I can just do it straight off of plans, elevations, sections, the usual drawings. But if it's something really complex, I have a draftsman who can do 3D Rhino models for me. Okay. And he can render it as well. Oh, nice. So really complex things, I definitely use 3-dimensional modeling to help visualize it, for sure.
Well, great. Well, so Mark, tell us a little bit about how you incorporate the same design voice across pieces. So when they see your work, they know that, hey, that's something that Mark did,
I think that's a great point. As a custom furniture maker, I don't feel like it's about me as much as it's about what my client wants and what they need. And so I feel like design is mostly about communication with them and fleshing out a third thing. Like the object eventually has a life of its own, but it's kind of up to me and the client to develop what that is together. I think you need really good clients, honestly, to do really good design. Yep. You need people who want to have those conversations with you, and that you will develop an idea just for them and just for their project. But looking back at years worth of work, I would say that I definitely have a tendency toward somewhat minimal, somewhat modern, stripped down, not too much detail, no classical moldings, Simple shapes, curves. I'm always trying to bring curves into my project. They're hard to make, right? They're a lot of work. It's hard to combine curves and straight lines, but you have to, functionally speaking.
Right.
So I have found over time there are definitely things that are recognizable to what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
My style, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've looked through your work. It's beautiful stuff.
Thank
but
you
yeah,
so much.
But you can see, hey, this is something that Mark made. Yeah. And Matt, same for you. So tell us about how you incorporate that, because you have a lot of the same philosophies, I think, that Mark does.
Yeah, I mean, I like admire shaker furniture, which is very stripped down. It relies on good proportions, and they use a lot of asymmetry, and they use the parts of the piece to sort of make a pattern or a geometric pattern on the most visible face of it. But Mark is right. If you have a client, you have to talk to the client. You can't. It's hard to. Some people will let you just force yourself on them, but usually people want to have. They have some idea about what they're looking for, but they might come to you because they've seen your work and they like your work, and that makes it, in a way, easier to always sort of have something of your voice in it. I don't know if for me it's a conscious effort. It's almost like, it's kind of like asking me every time you talk, how is your voice always the same? Well, it's just who I am, right? There are things that, the things that I find beautiful in the world, the things that attract me in the world, that's like what shows up most in my work. So, out when I'm walking around, I love color. And I also like the way that shadow and light interplay to create dimensionality. And I like to see patterns. And so that stuff just kind of naturally shows up in my work. I don't know if it's not really a conscious effort. And I think that unless I have a friend that works in a small shop, he doesn't really have a say in what he makes, right? So he just makes whatever he's given.
Yeah.
And unless you're in that situation, I think it would be really hard not to sort of eventually develop a voice that shows up in all of your work, Yeah.
That makes sense. So Matt, we'll stick with you. Our final question before we turn it over to the audience here. How do you continue to educate yourself on what's currently in style, or do you care?
Yeah, this was an interesting question.
Yeah.
What I look for, I don't think I really care what's in style right now. What I am more interested in is to look at stuff that's in a way timeless and see why it's timeless, because, Mark mentioned Nakashima, right?
Yep.
You can look at Nakashima, you can look at shaker furniture, you could look at Chippendale furniture, and they're all very different, but there's going to be something about them that makes them beautiful no matter the time period. So I'm always trying to distill what that is, and that if I'm fortunate, then I would be able to put that into my work. And so in a way, it's always trendy, but it's not trendy because it has some type of new sort of faddish thing in it. I think what makes things always beautiful is that they do strike some fundamental design principles, or something that is beautiful regardless of what might at the moment be in style. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but that's kind of the way I look at it. So I'm not too worried about trendy, what's really cool. I don't know, a river table was really cool for a while, but I didn't really care.
Yeah,
because
someone told me they're still a big deal. So
are they still a big deal? I don't know, but
I thought they would pass their time too, but I don't know.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's kind of how I think about it.
So, how about you, Mark? Do you look at any modern things and take those design things into consideration, or do you care at all, or what?
I, I definitely do still try to look at stuff.
Yeah.
Honestly, I follow places on Instagram that I've found out about all kinds of galleries. For instance, there's R and Company. It looks like Rand Co. R and Company.
Yeah.
Really great gallery. Carpenter's Workshop Gallery has amazing work. Not all of it's woodworking. So I think that Instagram is like a magazine that you can kind of customize to follow the kinds of things that you're interested in and see what your friends are following. You can see what your friends are looking at as well and go, oh, I can check that out. But as time has gone on, I'm less and less interested in what's current right now.
Understood.
There's definitely some very sculptural, weird things going on in craft
Yeah.
right now. There's something called sloppy craft, which looks sort of sloppy and handmade, but very intentionally sort of rebelling against standards. I'm not sure if I'm into that. But there's a lot of asymmetry in current design, like things that are deliberately asymmetrical, structures where things are not balanced or they're barely balanced. And things like that they give you something else to think about. It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
I recently read an article on interior design, and they were saying that avocado green as a color is coming back. Which is like,
I don't believe that.
No, I don't think so either. But
I would also say that as far as process goes, that being self-critical is actually worth doing, looking at projects that you built afterwards and going, okay, what would I do differently about this? What things, now that it's standing here on the floor next to me, what are the things that I notice now that I didn't notice before? And, it may even be just sort of the size and the scale of it. But I think it's really good to look at your own work and reassess it after it's done and just go, okay, I put all this effort into this one part of the apron that's underneath the overhang and I hardly even see it. So was that worth it? I think that being self-critical is part of that process. You got to look back. Take good photos also. Take good photos of your work. It's worth it to have good documentation. And it gives you something to look back at later on as well.
Right. That's a very, very good point. And Instagram's great for that too, because you can then share your work.
I enjoy it. I know it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Facebook is a little too personal. Instagram is more like a magazine. You get to curate your own content.
Right.
I don't know. I enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, so let's turn this over to y'all in the audience. Do y'all have any questions? Okay.
Hot mic. Who wants it?
Any questions, Philip?
Do you have any suggestions for looking for further formal training or education in design?
That is the hardest part. Austin School of Furniture and Design is mostly technical classes, and they have a very small group of people who get together and have their own design forum. The thing that you get in school that's hard to reproduce is just having a group of people around you who want to talk about this stuff and want to look at each other's work. So anytime that you can get friends together, anytime that you can get teachers and experienced people and young people together in the same place to talk about ideas is a great thing. There's not as many formal directions for that as I wish that there were. Do you have any thoughts?
I have absolutely no training in design, formal training. But I mean, I would think you might have to like go and like do industrial design program, or an architectural program, something like that, where there is emphasis on design and they talk about things, especially when it comes to the furniture, like the way the human body interacts with something, so that you understand why a chair needs to be a certain height and a certain width and things like that. Those are all things that you have to take into account when you're designing furniture. So I don't know of any place that does specifically design of furniture as a formal training, and most of the people I know who have formal training in design did something like industrial design or architecture as their background. But there are also a lot of amazing books available. There's a book, I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's basically tells you all the standard dimensions for all types of furniture. And although that's not a class, it's certainly a great resource that you can rely on to help initially inform the things that you're making, because that type of information is really critical in terms of human interaction with furniture. So.
But it definitely is about, design is definitely about practice. And if you're practicing all by yourself, you're just not getting as much feedback as you wish that you were. I can tell you a few things, like you definitely want to try multiple versions of something. Don't settle for your first version. Try something else completely different, and then after that, try a third thing that's completely different from that. Like, you really want to set up extremes that you can compare to each other, and that you can now go, oh, you know what? My first design actually did do that really well. Or you know what? My third one is actually maybe a little better. But like, who do you have those conversations with? Friends, fellow designers? I don't know. I think the best, if there was only an online sort of forum for people to be able to get together and talk design. I've been trying to find woodworking into having a design discussion online, but they haven't been able to do it yet. Yeah.
One more thing, and then we'll take Cameron's. One thing that I did when I wanted to really try to become a better designer, and this is sort of like what Mark's talking about, I decided to make a lot of one thing. I made 52 boxes in the course of a year, and so every week I tried to design something new and make it. Design it and make it. Design it and make it, because when you see it in your hand or on the floor or on a table, it's different and you can learn new things from it. So like, short of like being able to actually find formal, you can just do it over and over and over and over again. It's the 10,000 hour rule. Yeah.
I guess it's a question in two parts. So when you're thinking about design, is your first phase sort of thinking about like the aesthetic of how I want this piece to look, or are you also considering like proportion and like how am I gonna build this thing, or yeah.
I don't normally worry about how something's going to be made until it's time to make it. Although I do sort of keep that in mind, generally keep that in mind. But I guess what I start with is normally like you have to know like sort of like the function and the size of something, I think, because that gives you in a sense like some goals to work towards. But once I have like that in mind, like say it's going to be a wall cabinet, then is when you can start to really develop a design and think, all right, is there going to be one door, two doors, are there going to be drawers? how do I want to hang it? Because sometimes the way it's hung can inform the way that it looks. Like you can take something like that part of it and make it a design element. So you have to start thinking about all the different elements of a piece and what you can do with them and how you can arrange them and the types of woods you can use for them and the colors or the other, can I incorporate textiles, which I do a lot, fabric. And it's like, so once you know what you're making and roughly like how big it is, then you can really start to play around with all the different things that go into making it. So like the components of the piece of furniture, the wood, the hinges, the pulls, all that stuff they're opportunities for design. So I guess that's how I start. Yeah.
No, that's a good question. I often will take whatever the physical requirements are, and I'll draw those just so there's a scaled version of the elevations, the plan, so that those things are drawn to scale, and that I'm not fooling myself about whether something feels horizontal. I have the actual dimensions there. But that's one of the things that I'll compare that to then, is like my sketch felt like this table was really long and horizontal, but when I put the actual dimensions on it, it's a little more squarish than I thought. So how do I get back to re-emphasizing the horizontal again? Or do I just need to come up with a different variation? But these are the kinds of things that I do think about when I'm designing then, is because the basic dimensions are not going to design anything for you. And I think about things like heavy versus light. Is this piece of furniture more of a rhinoceros or more of a gazelle? I think about things like vertical versus horizontal. Sometimes that's sort of built into the program. A bookshelf is going to tend to be a vertical piece. What about the way that I'm drawing it emphasizes that verticality and really makes it feel taller? And, I like drawing things that are horizontal, like I was saying. So giving things overhangs, cantilevering the top over the legs. Are there ways, can I change the minimum requirements? That's another thing that happens if somebody tells you, well, no, this design needs to be exactly these dimensions, they might be some awkward proportion that actually isn't working in your favor very well. You won't know until you try that. And how do proportions work? That's just something that takes practice. I think that Lost Art Press, though, has some pretty good books right now about traditional proportional design and how those kinds of things worked. It helps to get a little bit of a perspective on it, but yeah, I do tend to think of dichotomies like heavy versus light, vertical versus horizontal, smooth versus rough, refined versus wild. When you have a live edge slab, for instance, I think it's kind of too easy to just say, yeah, it's a live edge slab and I put some legs on it. You really kind of have to work with that live edge slab a little bit. You have to say, no, we're gonna change the ends on it. We're gonna really make the ends extremely round and soft. So the end grain is different from the long grain. So again, it's kind of like using the material as part of the inspiration, but also just sort of don't settle for stuff that you've seen before. Work things in different directions and push it. As craftspeople, we take risks. And as craftspeople, hopefully you have enough experience to say, these are risks that I'm comfortable taking, or these are risks that I'm willing to push a little bit further, because I know what I'm capable of doing technically. I think as a designer, you're also taking risks. That they're visual ideas, but you have to decide, okay, is it worth saying this edge is really sharp and razor sharp and hard edged? Or what if I round it out? What if I just completely round it, make it very soft, almost like it's like a poster, it just happens to be made out of wood. So I think you can kind of push these things. You have to take these kind of visual risks yourself, but don't be satisfied right off the bat. It's going to take a few. I say it takes me at least 2, maybe 3 rounds of design before I've got something refined to the point where it's like, okay, now I feel good about it. Don't be satisfied right off the bat.
Well, thank you so much. So with that, we're about ready to wrap up this panel. I feel like we could go for another couple of hours with y'all too, but maybe you'll. Okay.
I'm going to need a slideshow.
Okay. Oh, the slideshow.
I'm going to need a pointer. I'm going to need a pen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're talking about design is like dancing about architecture.
Exactly. Well, before we leave you, where can folks find you on the interwebs? Should they want to get in touch or find out more about what you're offering? And do you have anything else to promote, like a book called 52 Boxes?
Well, I have an Instagram account. It's MEK Woodworks. You can find me. I post on Instagram regularly. I also have a website, MEKWoodworks.com. That's about the only place I am online. I don't know. I've written 3 books. 2 of them about boxes, and one of them is about Kumiko.
Yeah, they're all really, really nice.
And I teach. I do teach at this Austin School of Furniture on a fairly regular basis. And I also teach all over the country. If you're ever in Australia, I teach in Australia. So just look for me.
Sounds like a good excuse to go to Australia
It's
to take
always,
a class.
always a good excuse to go to Australia, yeah.
Mark, what about yourself?
My Instagram is Moondragon Macek, and I also have my students' work. Every semester I take photographs of their work. Here's some of my students here right now. Thanks for showing up.
All right.
Buddha Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see you. Hey, but I also have a website at macekfurniture.com. It's just a Squarespace site, but try to keep it up to date. Check it out, please.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank y'all too so much, and thank y'all for listening.